All right, today I'm going to go over the back squat, the barbell back squat with a straight bar. A couple things. This could be a pretty extensive video. My goal is to condense some of this information and give you, I guess, kind of like waypoints, some things that are not necessarily absolutes or like hard and fast sort of rules when it comes to the squat, but we want to give you basically checkpoints to make sure you, the athlete, are able to hit these points. And then as an individual, it's kind of like a sport. Like I'm going to break this down a little bit, like disassemble it in parts. And as we reassemble it, that's the squat, okay, the barbell back squat. So working from the ground up, kind of the way my brain works, foot width, okay? If you jump up and land, that's pretty much where you're going to want to be. So in the same context, if you're standing on a very, very shallow block, block and step off of it, we wouldn't have to base out so much. If you're standing, on an object like this high, when you come off of it, you're probably gonna widen out and widen out even more with that big drop. So I bring that up because if we're squatting something, we want to be high velocity, we want to have our foot position where we would sprint from, right? Be really explosive and vertical. As we get onto a higher height or a heavier weight, the body naturally wants to start basing out to support that weight. So keep that in mind. That's why you see extremes. You see some high velocity speed jumping type stuff, feet are close, and then you see the other side of like the sport of powerlifting, where they're really, really wide and based out, right? That is indicative of the sport, also the weight that is on their backs and shoulders. So again, foot width is where you can jump and land from a shallow height. Our toe direction, again, a lot of people naturally, toes will come out a little bit. That's fine to a point, okay? But again, if I have my toes way out here and I say, hey, I need you to be athletic and run, can't do that either. So the goal is to start bringing those feet, right, to a position where I can jump from. That's where I fight from, okay? I'm shooting from this position. I'm not from here, okay? So I want to put you in that athletic position, and it's not against the, this sport of powerlifting and so forth, okay? So we're focusing on the tactical population, okay? Working on the way up to the knees. One of the biggest common flaws is because the question's like, hey, I thought toes over knees were bad. Well, toes over knees, knees over toes are bad. You hear that a lot of times. Well, where that comes from is that the initiating movement is forward, right? So now we are knees over toes in an improper start. But again, if we talk about a sprinting position, knee does go over toes. That's not the issue. So how do we simply fix that? And I'm a visual type person. So what I tell the people is, if my starting point is and should be glute contracted, rib cage neutral, not pitched up, what happens then with the knees, if we're in a good position, instead of us loading the weight and going forward, because that is the path of least resistance for the body, what we really want to do is create a chain of contraction. So the glutes contract. When the glutes begin to release, there has to be another muscle group that takes on that tension. So there's not like a drop of weight and then a catch of that resistance. So glutes are tight, right? And I always say this, a visual standpoint. Imagine there's a wall in front of you, like 8 inches, and same back here, there's a wall. So what I'm gonna do is from my hip joint all the way to my cervical spine, that is rigid, that stays straight. I'm gonna pitch my body forward to that 9-inch mark, and my back goes to that wall, essentially, okay? So I always say, glutes are tight. As I push, again, I'm not just bending forward and sticking my butt, I'm pushing my butt back, and that takes the tension from the glutes to the hamstrings and quads, okay? So that chain of contraction then is glutes, start leaning, tension goes on hips, my body cants forward, and then from that position then I can go down. So I would say, put my butt against the wall, okay? Slide down the wall, slide back up the wall, come off the wall, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's kind of like the chain of contraction that I'm talking about. The chain of contraction is from the squat position, from the lower body, right? I'm gonna squeeze my glutes, okay? When the glutes then begin to release, I've got to transfer that attention to hamstrings. Flex those hamstrings, right? The quads get engaged. And then I descend vertically, right? Get to that bottom, ascend vertically. Then hips come off the wall, butt comes off the wall with a glute contraction, okay? We also want to avoid, boom, contracting here, okay? This torso angle, okay, so the rib cage and whatnot, what we want to avoid is this pelvic anterior tilt. You don't want to squat here, okay? The tilt stays neutral, okay? And instead of sticking our butt out working for tips, what we're doing is glutes are tight. This torso, right, stays married up with the hips like that, okay? That's the lean. We push that butt back. Now I can go up and down with a contraction, okay? As soon as I do that, right, then it affects the upper body. So that's the next piece we're talking about. We talk about the feet, we talk about the knees, what goes on, the glute contraction, the ribs are neutral, not poked out, okay? So again, think about police officers, right? If they're detaining somebody, what are they gonna do? They're gonna take them and put their hands behind their back. They're gonna internally rotate the humerus, okay? Because that is how they control hips. Whatever happens to this shoulder happens to this hip and vice versa, okay? So why do I bring that up? If you have a bar on your back, right, and you're internally rotated, you've taken tension, unintentionally, taken the tension off your hips, right? That's why you see a lot of people that are here, head comes forward, internally rotate this, then the knees do that. They become valgus, okay? So we screw that, we externally rotate that humerus, boom, ribs stay neutral, I pull down with that bar, and then I can go up and down that wall, so to speak. So what I'll do is I'll demonstrate facing both ways so you can see and I can talk through it. But again, what I don't want you to mistake is that as I have these talking points that you should stop, go, okay? Once we dissect it and then we reassemble it, it becomes a single motion, okay? So I'm not advocating boom, 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 and so on, okay? It then becomes a single smooth movement. So here's an example, and I'll talk through some of these points, and then I'll change the angle and then show you, okay? So, first things first is I always say get into starting blocks, okay? Before I decide to descend, I'm gonna put my upper body in a nice stable position, okay? And I'm gonna do that first by getting a good base. Contract my glutes. Don't lock the knees. They're straight, but they're not locked. Contract the glutes, okay? Make sure I have a good, as much hand grip on this, as much surface area as I can on the bar, okay? I don't want to be here again, remember, because then this happens. So I want to, glutes are tight, head is back, forearms are vertical, okay? And I'm actually pulling down on the bar, right? So starts with a big, nice, slow, deep breath. Okay? Do the opposite of a shrug. Contract my glutes. Shoulder blades are down. Okay? And here's that chain of contraction I was talking about. Okay, once I'm stable, glutes are tight, lats are down. Push that butt back. Descend. Ascend. Glutes to finish. Okay? And again, one more time, right? Big, long, slow, deep breath. And I'll do the opposite of a shrug with a glute contraction. Glutes go back, hamstrings are tight. Descend down that wall, up the wall, butt off the wall with a contraction. Okay? So, in short, okay, I would say practice those movements. Right? Practice the initial okay, my butt's tight. When I release the glutes, I don't want those hips to fall in. Okay, so there's got to be something that's got to pick up that contraction, that tension. That's why it's glutes tight. As I begin to loosen, hamstrings to pick it up, descent, ascend, glute to finish. And that's the last thing I have to say about that is your finish should look a lot like your your start. And here's kind of what I mean as a demonstration is if your finish is reciprocal to your start, what you'll end up finding through breathing, what you'll find is that you can be very rhythmic, okay? Just an idea just like this, okay? Big, long, deep breath, right? Pull those shoulder blades down with a glute contraction, butt goes back, descend, ascend, exhale, but don't dump it. Back into my breath. Okay, so one of the things I commonly will say is that your breathing is what sets your cadence for your rhythm. Okay, so again, you get to the top, take a couple breaths if you need to, brace and hold. Okay, because we don't want to exhale while we're trying to produce a lot of force. And in this case, specifically the change of direction. Right, as we descend with the mass. We got to change our direction in a vertical plane. That change of direction, that's where force is at its greatest. So we certainly don't want to expire and give up that thoracic stability when we're trying to squat, right? Or any other thing. Like if you think about it, we don't exhale fully before we punch. We don't exhale fully before you kick, right? Dumping that inner thoracic pressure destabilizes the spine. And we certainly don't want to destabilize the spine when we're squatting. So that is the overview of the barbell back squat.